Hi everyone, how are you? My name is Bella Blanton. Real quick here, can you guys see me okay? Or just if you can see me, just drop a thumbs up in the chat. If not, I'll have to check my mic and my thing. Okay, you can hear me, but not see me. Can you guys see me now? Okay, so you, but no video, that's okay. Okay, now you should be able to see me for sure. All right, I apologize for that. Okay, so we're gonna start off with looking at the 30 Years' War and like the background of it. So we're gonna go here and begin. To start off, I'm going to share the link for the presentation with all of you, and if possible, I would like it if you guys could like open it up because we're gonna do some like engagement on the document. So you can click right there. It should be available for you guys to look at, and we'll jump into it. So the 30 Years' War was a huge event. So we're going to start here with what's coming soon. If you guys stay afterwards, you guys can learn about the French Wars of Religion with Shari. And then next Friday, we're going to be discussing women of the Renaissance and Reformation at the same time. Yeah, the link is also uploaded under the stream resources. So that'd be like a good place to like check. So make sure you click there. Looks like we have one person in here. Good. So we're going to talk about first, we're going to lay out some context for the 30 Years' War, and then we're going to go into the Bohemian Phase, the Danish Phase, the Swedish Phase, the French-Swedish Phase. We're going to go to the Peace of Westphalia, and then like we're going to actually do some POV analysis and like try to pick out some like major takeaways ourselves, because a lot of like AP Euro is like taking good notes and having like an idea of what you're doing. So we'll look there. Okay, so some context for the war. It's important to like think about how fragmented the German portion of the Holy Roman Empire actually was during this era. Germany was a divided territory like far away from like the modern state that it is now. That was actually pretty significant like economically because merchants and traders crisscrossed a lot through this territory trading things, and it was actually like really like profitable. And a lot of like different rulers wanted to like control this. They wanted profit, lands, legal privileges, everything. So after the Council of Trent, Protestants like spread across the empire, and like they suspected that like there was going to be a conspiracy in the form of like a new Catholic empire almost. And this was all like pretty crazy here because if you look closely here, if you like blow up the image or something, you can see that there's at least 360 like autonomous like political entities here. These are like everything from like bishoprics, abbeys, free cities, knights, everything. So yeah, the emperor himself only ruled to the extent to which he was like willing to use force against his subjects. Basically that meant that like did he feel like he had the like arms necessary to like enforce a policy, or was it like if he didn't have those, he couldn't like enforce it. And you see a lot of that with, that's how they were able, that's where the Protestant Reformation actually started, because it was so fragmented that they couldn't like control it and like stop it immediately like the Spanish Inquisition would have been able to do, for example. So that was pretty significant. And then there's also like a huge religious split that was going on during this time. The Holy Roman Empire was actually half Protestant and like half Catholic. So the Peace of Augsburg, there's also the Peace of Augsburg that had happened prior to this, and there's like a possibility for like territorial reversals. That was like the huge thing that everyone was all concerned about, both the Protestants and the Catholics alike. They were worried that because like the Lutherans had like been far more successful in like securing lands, the Catholics were worried that they were gonna keep securing lands and keep driving like farther into the empire, and they resented that a lot, and it was like a huge source of like animosity between them. And the Protestants themselves were even fragmented. There was like a huge difference between like the Lutherans and the Calvinists, which we're going to get into here in a few minutes, that made them like pretty angry with each other. So yeah, there's also like the Calvinism was not officially recognized by the Peace of Augsburg, and the Calvinists established a Protestant defensive alliance like backed by Spain's enemies. And Lutherans did not agree with like Calvinist ideas at all. Particularly, these ideas were the aggressive missionaries and the denial of transubstantiation. So the aggressive missionaries were like, the Calvinists were sending missionaries from the Holy Roman Empire out into Europe, and that was like bothersome for the Lutherans because they were worried that this was going to like cause a lot of some of the, like the princes and the other like European leaders around them to reconsider the Peace of Augsburg and consider like getting rid of it, because they didn't, the Catholics, a lot of the princes were Catholic, so they were worried that they would be upset by that. They also denied, the Calvinists anyway, denied transubstantiation. So transubstantiation, if you guys have like learned this in your AP Euro course yet, is basically the idea that you at communion, you are serving the body and the blood of Christ. So that's what that is. And the Calvinists denied that, and that was like a problem for the Lutherans, who didn't always deny it. Also, we need to talk about the Catholic League. So Catholic Bavaria supported the Counter-Reformation, and Jesuits launched missions from this area specifically. If you'll remember back, the Jesuits were founded during the Counter-Reformation by Ignatius Loyola to re-Catholicize Europe and reform this like universal Christendom. So they won back, they actually were successful in winning back like several cities. For example, they won back Strasbourg. And by 1609, Maximilian I had organized a Catholic League to counter the Protestant alliance formed by Frederick IV. Okay, so that was like a lot of information here. So I'm going to jump back into the chat, and I would like you guys to identify one of the causes for me here, okay? We have, yeah, just identify a cause. And I'll start here. One cause, for example, well, not a cause, like one of the preconditions for war, that would be the Catholic League. The Catholic League was a precondition for war. So do you know maybe one of the other ones for the slides? If you have them still open, that's helpful, or if you don't, that's okay. And I'll wait a minute here before we move on. Let's see. Anyone? Okay. All right, we can just move on then, I guess. So we'll move on to the Bohemian phase. Okay. So the Bohemian phase, if you look here, we have the Defenestrations of Prague, which were a famous event. If you guys probably all remember this from your Euro class. Basically, a bunch of angry Protestants threw Catholics out a window, and they actually survived. And you see down here, we have some of the princes. We have, I think we have, yeah, we have Maximilian and Frederick on either side of there. So, beginnings. To start off with, in 1617, Bohemia, which is the modern-day Czech Republic, and King Ferdinand, who was an adamant Catholic, was like crowned king here, and that was a problem because he wanted to bring back Catholicism. But to do so, he would have to revoke freedoms that had been in place for 50 years that a lot of the princes had been enjoying. And this was actually put in place by Rudolf in his Letter of Majesty. And anger is what boiled over into the Defenestrations of Prague. So this, if you see here, this was like a lot of this was about power and control. These princes were autonomous. They had their own like kingdoms, their own regions. So they didn't want to lose any of that power. And the Peace of Augsburg had given them the power to like decide this for themselves. And they didn't want to lose any of that. So there was actually a new election. By 1619, Matthias, who had been the Holy Roman Emperor, died, and Ferdinand was the guy that replaced him. The Bohemians didn't like this. Frederick, the Winter King, was a Calvinist elector, and that was who they tried to actually replace him with. And Spain sent Ferdinand troops because Ferdinand got angry by this, and he wanted to reinforce himself and like reassert himself within Spanish politics. So Spain sent him troops, and then he was also aided by Maximilian of Bavaria and George I of Saxony. And what you have to understand that like during each phase of the war, while it was more pronounced towards the end, politics always played a role. Here you can see Maximilian of Bavaria actually wanted to go to war against the Protestant king, who was the Calvinist king, Frederick, because he wanted an electoral title. And then George I of Saxony was looking for a major territorial gain. So if you can you shoot me in the chat a 1 through 5, how confident you are on what we've discussed so far? Whenever you can, just shoot me a 1 through 5. All right, we'll keep going then. So let me see. There were several like major outcomes of the Bohemian phase. For example, Lutheran Calvinist divisions split the Protestant faction, and during the Battle of White Mountain in 1620, there was a major Catholic League victory. And by 1622, Frederick was out. Ferdinand used this control to create an authoritarian state, and the Palatinate was conquered. Attempts were also made to re-Catholicize Bohemia. So Bohemia was, if you'll remember, in like the modern Czech Republic. So that was pretty important so far. And that's one of the major battles on the right. That's the Battle of White Mountain. Okay, so why didn't the 30 Years' War end in 1622? This is a good question to ask because obviously, as you'll see, Frederick the Winter King was like outed. So why didn't the 30 Years' War end if like Frederick was outed and Ferdinand had his control? Well, for one, Protestants were still rightly afraid of a re-Catholicization of the empire, and they wanted to resist at all costs. They did not want to have their freedoms taken. They didn't want Ferdinand to have that power. And mercenaries across Europe as well wanted to keep fighting. This was like a mercenary is like a soldier that's paid by a state, and they're not necessarily from that state to fight. And they wanted to continue fighting because that was their way of making a living. That was all they could do with what they had. So there's also a lot of like outside interference, particularly the King of Denmark began to intervene here. So yeah, and that starts off the Danish phase, which you'll see here with this very like regal picture of the King of Denmark. So entering phase 2, the King of Denmark got involved because he wanted to support the Protestants, but he also had other like political motivations. Like he wanted to extend Danish territories into the North Sea. So if you'll see, like politics is like seeping more and more into this. And he was actually defeated by Ferdinand's general Maximilian in 1626, and he left back for Denmark. That was pretty much like as soon as he invaded, he was immediately defeated, and he had to like leave back for Denmark. So there's actually Ferdinand actually had to hire a new general, Wallenstein. Ferdinand was afraid that Maximilian's power was going to interfere with his ability to assert himself within his empire. He was more so afraid of like his success so far. He wanted to be, Maximilian was also afraid because he was afraid of like the Habsburg like hegemony, like their ability to extend influence over him and like his policy. So Wallenstein promised him an army. So Ferdinand basically took care of Maximilian, and Wallenstein went and invaded back into Denmark and was actually pretty successful by that, from that. And actually by 1628, Ferdinand could no longer control him. So that meant that like Wallenstein's actions weren't like they weren't an implementation of Ferdinand's policy, they were actions by themselves. And these victories he's had over the Protestants so far actually are what enable Ferdinand to enact a brand new policy called the Edict of Restitution. So that was asserted in 1629, and basically Catholic safeguards from the Peace of Augsburg were reasserted, and it was banning Calvinism as well, and Lutherans were required to turn over all properties they had taken from the Catholics. That was actually a lot. That was like 16 bishoprics, I think, 28 cities, and 155 monasteries and covenants. That's like a lot of territory. And that is a lot of profit as well. So that you can see there's some greed involved there. And he could profit a lot off of that. So as a side note, we should also probably talk about the question of liberty. So Catholics and Protestants alike were worried, like when the Constitution of the Holy Roman Empire was altered to give their vote to Bavaria, and they thought that this was like an attack on like German liberties, meaning like the freedoms that these traditionally like disunified princes have had. And the question of liberty came up again when Ferdinand confiscated defeated Protestant princes' land in the north and threatened like a unified Habsburg state. So if you'll see, these are all of the different, like on the right, all the different like principates. On the side, you can see all their different like crests of arms. And basically what this is showing you is that Germany was, well, it didn't become Germany until the 1800s. Germany was very disunified at this point in like European history. So there's also the Swedish phase going on here. If you'll see on your right, that's a major Swedish king called like Gustavus Adolphus. I've always found the Swedish phase kind of funny because Sweden doesn't really get involved much in European politics, and all of a sudden like this king comes out of nowhere and like affects the entirety of the war. And anyhow, so Sweden, Gustavus Adolphus got involved officially because he saw there to be a major infringement on Protestant rights throughout the Holy Roman Empire, which upset him a lot. So he was also interested in territory surrounding the Baltic and was manipulated by two other forces. There's Cardinal Richelieu, who wanted to maintain a divided Germany, and of course the Dutch. So if you'll think about it, like Cardinal Richelieu, that means he's like an official member of the church, the Catholic Church, and he's French. So why would he get involved in funding Swedish troops to fight a war in the Holy Roman Empire? Well, this is again about politics. So Cardinal Richelieu wanted to get involved there because he wanted to maintain a divided Germany and Habsburg state so that France could still remain a dominant power on the European continent. If Germany was to unify during that period, or just any period, as you'll see later, the whole balance of power on the continent would be affected. So he wanted to make sure that France stayed strong throughout all of this, and he did not want any infringement whatsoever by any sort of unified Germany. So let's see. In an alliance with Brandenburg and Saxony, Gustavus Adolphus was able to win a lot of different battles. So he had the Battle of Breitenfeld in 1630, which you'll see on the right. He won that. Basically, he was able to take over the Catholic forces and return them. And then in the Battle of Lutzen in 1632, he actually died. And that was really bad for like the Protestant cause, because Adolphus had been such a good like military general at that point that like leaving him like dead was like a huge like power factor in the battle. So after that, actually not even like a year later, Wallenstein was like murdered because Ferdinand feared that he was conspiring with opponents. So from what we've said so far, I'd like to like pick out like a couple of like the major themes that we've seen so far. We have religion, greed, and politics. So the religion started in the beginning, if you'll remember, with the Bohemian phase. That was the reason why we had this problem in the first place, because of Ferdinand and his attempts to re-Catholicize the empire. So the greed is a lot of like this territory grabbing and like this money grabbing. Like a lot of the powers wanted to get in and influence Germany, which had a lot of money from the merchants and just general profit to be made. And then politics. They were all like land. It was a lot of land grabs. If you'll remember, a couple of the different like leaders back there had like, they wanted to like control the North Sea or like control the Baltic. They wanted territory on this. And that has a lot to do with economics as well. And there's also some political involvement here. That would be especially with Cardinal Richelieu, who wanted to keep the Habsburg territory in Germany divided at all costs here. So on. there is actually a Peace of Prague. Following this, German Protestant states reached a compromise with Ferdinand. France and the Netherlands continued to support Sweden, and not wanting to lose out, they refused to join in on the compromise. So when I say not wanting to like lose out, I mean that France and the Netherlands, who continued to support Sweden, they had made investments in this war already. They wanted to ensure that the Habsburg territory remained divided at all costs. So there's a lot of economics there. And they refused to join in on this compromise because they wanted to continue fighting, because it was either you cut your losses now or you keep going with the potential to earn more. And that's what they chose to do. They wanted to earn a lot more money from and land from this and keep them divided. There's also the Swedish and French phase, which was after this, and there was a lot of destruction in this phase, honestly, guys. So France joined, and they were already joining kind of by like indirectly supporting the Habsburg territories. Not the Habsburg. They were indirectly supporting Sweden when they invaded the Habsburg territories to try to keep Protestantism in place. They officially joined in 1635, and they sent a lot of things to the war. They sent men, they sent munitions and financial subsidies, but Germans were too disunited to repel these forces. All of these different territories, I think it was like 160 or 360, something like that, disunited territories, could not like unify and like repel these forces. So the French and the Swedes ended up just fighting against the Habsburgs and the Spanish wherever they could. And this was like by far the most destructive phase of the war. We had agricultural collapse, we had famine, population decimation, and Germany was actually down by 8 million, which was 1/3 of its total population. And that's a bit of like a more graphic depiction of it. On the right here, we have Cardinal Richelieu, like a representation of him like looking over the burning of Germany, because it was like a lot of his policy that like impacted this and led France to like join the war on that side. And you'll also see like this graphic picture of all these people in that tree. That's like showing like the total absolute devastation that was caused by the war in Germany, and like, well, the Habsburg territory that was Germany. And it wouldn't be like repaired for a while. In fact, I don't think the Habsburgs ever really got like played a huge role in politics afterwards. So before I move on to the Peace of Westphalia, I want to open it up here for a second. Do we have any questions so far? I don't think we have any so far. We're all good. Okay, so we'll move on then to the Peace of Westphalia. So I want to bring up to your attention the differences in like geography that were occurring during this here. So on the right, we can see there's a giant map of the Holy Roman Empire. This is what happens after the war as opposed to before the war. And we're going to talk about some geographical changes here. I'm going to blow this up so you can look a little closer at it, and I'll push it back down here in a second. Move this out of the way. Okay, so if you'll see, we have to Brandenburg, which was a new state that was like able to form to like the north. Huge military complex that was important later in the 19th century. You'll see that there was some that was given away to Transylvania, some to Saxony, another strong state, some to France, which was kind of like their spoils of like war for like supporting the disunity. They were able to get that out of it. And then there was some to Bavaria, some to Poland, and it shows some of like the major defeats there too and like successes. So I'll squish that back down here for a second. Definitely know that the map of Europe changed a lot during this period, and that it's impacted the rise of like the nation states that we see today. Okay, so the Peace of Westphalia, occurred in 1648, which makes sense because 1618 to 1648, that's 30 years, and it ended the 30 Years' War. And the Holy Roman Empire actually remained like extremely divided at this point. The emperor was very ineffectual in German politics or Holy Roman Empire politics or really anywhere in Europe after this period. And there's like, that was the continuation of German division and political weakness that manifested there. And basically what this did do is ensure that France became the dominant power and that they had the best say in European politics for a while to come here. But actually, as an interesting like side note, France and Spain actually remained at war until 1659. And that's like a whole like 11 years afterwards. And France dominated at the expense of Habsburg Spain. So that's them signing the treaty over there. So there's a few provisions that we need to consider here. For one, there's a reaffirmation of the Augsburg Formula. What does that mean? Well, it rescinded the Edict of Restitution, which was, if you'll remember, Ferdinand's attempt to control religion within the empire. And then it also recognized Calvinism, which is interesting here because by recognizing Calvinism, they hadn't done so before in like the Peace of Augsburg. That wasn't a thing. It wasn't a part of the Peace of Augsburg. So by recognizing that, they were adding on to like the idea of Protestant faith in Europe. There's a lot of territory and power here, and I'm going to go back to this map here. The Netherlands and Switzerland were recognized as independent, which was important for territory-wise. Also, Bavaria became an elector state, which affects the politics within the Holy Roman Empire. And then Brandenburg Prussia emerged as the most powerful German state. So that's pretty important military-wise. And the Pope actually opposed the treaty, but he didn't really have any power to do anything about it. Because Europe was so fragmented, there was no more like universal like Christendom in Europe. So the Pope did not like this because obviously it wasn't like a complete victory for Catholicism. But there wasn't really anything that he could do to stop it. So it ended up staying in place. All right, so I'm gonna jump in the chat here. Is there anyone here? If you're here, just type like a 5 or a 1 or something. Anyone here? Let's see. Okay, we'll keep going. I'll actually just model this then if there's no one going to like help participate. So, okay. So I think it's a really key idea to look at an image and you'll see this in your DBQ and to split it into like 4 pieces when you're analyzing it. So I'm going to try this here. Let's see if this works. Yep, it is working. So what my teacher taught me is to divide it into 4, and I think that that's a good technique to use. So I'm just going to real quick here, split this into 4 distinct sections. Okay, so what's going on here in this image? We have on the left, we'll start up here. So I'm just gonna take some notes here. So we always like when you're looking at POV and image, it's best to like take notes. It doesn't have to be like super long, but like just an idea of what's going on. So on the left here, we'll start here. I see, Cardinal Richelieu's right there, right? He's like looking off into the distance. So I can identify him, and on a regular GBQ, because this is French in the bottom and I happen to know that what image this is, it would tell you who it was in the image or something, especially if it was in like a foreign language. So I can see if this is like Cardinal Richelieu here. Let me see if I can spell his name right this time around. Okay, so that's who, not quite. We'll leave it. And then on the right here, we can see that like towards the right, he looks like he's picking something off of these leaves. And actually what that is the Huguenots, who are a Protestant group within France. And he's picking them off a flower that symbolizes France. So if you'll see, that means that, let me see, that symbolizes France, yeah. Symbolizes France, okay. So he's trying to remove them from France as best he can because he doesn't want any interference and he doesn't want anyone to question like the absolute rule that's going on here. So he's picking them off that. And then you notice on the side, there's, on the upper right corner, you can see an eagle and it's kind of like in chains here, right? And there's also like a lion that's in chains. So what does this mean? Well, those are the Catholic powers today, like the major Catholic rivals. So those are in chains and they're over there by him. So why in the world would like all this be going on? Why is he picking off like French Huguenots and then the Catholic rivals are in chains? Well, what's important here is that he's removing Protestants from his own country, but he's interfering in politics in different countries to keep his rival Catholic powers at bay. And that would be like Spain, for example, and like the Habsburgs and the Holy Roman Empire, all of that together. So those are who are in chains over there. That's what's going on there. So he's keeping them in chains by funding these Protestant forces. So he's keeping them in chains and keeping them held back for his own benefit. So that would maybe be like a good thing to keep in mind for like a POV. So Cardinal Richelieu believed, and Richelieu believed that the Protestant powers should be removed from his own country, but he should intervene in other countries' affairs. So what would be like the purpose of creating an image like this? Well, for one, we have to think of audience here. So obviously this card, whoever made this, and then this was made back in like the 17th century as like a political commentary here. So whoever made this obviously had like an agenda. They were against namely Cardinal Richelieu's policies. They were showing that he's being like basically hypocritical, and that he's betraying his own country, like his own country and his faith, by interfering overseas, and that it's like not really like an ethical thing to keep in mind. So that's important to note. So make sure you always consider audience, and then the other one would count kind of for situation, I think, almost. Okay, so what are some major takeaways? I'm going to see if anyone's in the chat, and if not, we'll just run through this together and keep this in mind. So when you're doing AP Euro or any AP history in general, it's always important to take good notes. And to take good notes, you need to look into the information you've learned and pull out key ideas and concepts that you think might apply or show up somewhere else, and not really focus so much on the details, although the details can be important for AP Euro. So what are some of the major takeaways you could take? Well, for one, the intersection of religion and politics. You have there you have the Cardinal, you have the princes that were sending Ferdinand armies into his empire. They were sending him armies so that he could defeat these Protestant forces because they were hoping to get something out of it. So there's a huge intersection of religion and politics here. And that also ties in a bit with greed. That would be like they wanted these territories. They wanted to gain an economic advantage by having them and possessing them, or by just in general having this territory around like these major seaports, which they could establish like cities on, which you could see later with Peter the Great, but that's a different story for a different day. Those are all key takeaways for sure. And then the Peace of Westphalia, this is very important, and it actually shows up a bit on the College Board's key concepts here. So what's important about the Peace of Westphalia? Well, it redefined the map of Europe. So that's extremely important. It redefined the map of Europe. And you'll see that here. It created like new elector states. What else did it do? It recognized Netherlands and Switzerland as independent. It created like different like power vacuums, which were pulled up by like Brandenburg Prussia. And I think definitely Austria as well, after the Peace of Westphalia, emerged as another like important like state. And also, of course, we have France, which gained all this like extra power here. So the Peace of Westphalia for sure. Peace of Westphalia. Let's see. And then we will want to also talk about the Peace of Augsburg and like a major takeaway. So the Peace of Augsburg, what was its role perhaps in like starting this war and like continuing it throughout? Like, why was it so important? Because of the Peace of Augsburg that had given these German princes all these rights. So it had given them these ideas that they did not want taken away by anyone. So that's also extremely important to keep in mind. And I will add on to that later for the stream notes. I'll add a couple of extra bullets here. You guys are here. I'd probably have you guys add in a little bit too. But for now, that's the end of it. So do we have any other questions before I end the stream? If you have any more questions, you can just type it in the box here. If not, we'll go ahead and end. All right. Well, thank you for coming today. I hope you guys learned a bit more about the 30 Years' War, and I hope you guys stick around afterwards for Shari's stream or drop by next week. Thank you.